Hey everybody, Optimus Tom here with a standard Rakdos deck that I have dubbed Rakdos Inti because I'm going to be practicing for my RCQ and I'm not probably going to be the best at using the deck, so I will be inting a little bit, but it's basically the Rakdos Midrange deck that is using Inti, Central of the Sun, rather than going for the Trumpeting Carnosaur version, which is something I piloted at a previous RCQ to a top 8 finish. The reason I'm mainly changing the deck is because as I was playing through the Rakdos Carnosaur version or the Rakdos Discover version of the deck, I saw that Gix Yawgmoth Praetor was a very powerful Magic the Gathering card, and I only had room for one in that list. I wanted to make room for more, but there were sub 20 creatures or about 20 creatures in that list, whereas the Inti list here, you can see, is running 27 creatures. So it's able to fully take advantage of Gix. And then because we're going a little bit more creature heavy, we're going a little bit more aggro, we're going a little bit more underneath, it does wind up going up to Archfiend of the Dross at 4 to complement Sheoldred the Apocalypse. And in doing so, we do cut down on the number of geological appraisers, so we don't have the same kind of discover, flood the board turn that we do with the Carnosaur version, where you have 4 appraisers and 4 Carnosaurs, and because of that, you also don't have any Cruelty of Gix in the main deck. You're going a little bit more lean and lower to try to combat Domain and get under it, try to combat the field of all the different types of mid-range decks and such. When I was playing the Rakdos Discover version and I was trying to be the bigger deck, I did see that especially the Dimir mid-range deck was able to out-tempo me. It did have negate and disdainful stroke type counter magic that was able to interact with my Cruelty of Gixes and then put a big turn, actually making me behind instead. And because we're running Cavernous Souls in that list and in this list as well, they were taking out their low to the ground counter magic, the things that actually interacted with creatures, put in removal spells for those, and then we're able to just sit there with negates so that my Cruelty of Gixes were pretty much a non-factor whatsoever. So because of that, I wanted to go a little bit lower. This does mean that we're a little bit weaker to the fact that Domain decks are running more copies of Depopulate to kind of board wipe against the Bant Toxic decks and the Mono Red Aggro decks. And I do think that Mono Red specifically might be a little bit more difficult because I don't have the Carnosaurs to kind of double as a removal spell, untap, reanimate them, and flood the board or kill their board or something like that by flipping into a Brotherhood's End from the sideboard. So we'll have to see if the aggro matchups get a little bit more difficult to navigate, although I do think I'm still pretty favored in this. We are wind up running 3 copies of Bitter Triumph and only 1 copy of Go for the Throat in this list. The main reason for that is that Bitter Triumph is able to get rid of things like the Wandering Emperor, which the Trumpeting Carnosaur version could do by them flashing it in. You discard the Carnosaur, sure, they get an activation, but it dies. Bitter Triumph kills Planeswalkers. So we kind of need that to deal with things like the Wandering Emperor. It also lets us discard cards, which triggers Inti, so that's very powerful. I was thinking about putting a couple of copies of Long Goodbye in this list instead of some Bitter Triumphs or Go for the Throats, but Go for the Throat does still kill Sheoldred. It does still kill Trumpeting Carnosaur. It does still kill a bunch of cards that are in the format. The one good thing that Long Goodbye does is that it can't be countered, so it gets around Ward, and all of these spells do wind up killing the opposing Preacher of the Schisms and opposing Gixes, so it could be more powerful, but for now we're going to try the Bitter Triumph to deal with some of the Planeswalkers. Speaking of, we do have a singleton copy of Liliana of the Veil in our main deck. We do have 2 extra copies in our sideboard. We could put these in for more mid-rangey, grindy matchups where the discard and the sacrifice actually becomes a very powerful threat. And against some of the control decks that are rising up, Liliana is a house in those matchups. So other sideboard cards we do see is Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal. This was in the main deck of the Discover version, but I've moved it into the sideboard here. Once again, comes in against the kind of mid-range matchups, and it's just something that we could put in against aggro as well to gain life, especially the Mono Red version. So now slamming a Sheoldred or an Aclazot is a very powerful turn against those aggro decks. The rest of the deck is going to be Hand Disruption. We have 3 copies of Duress. We have 2 copies of Extract the Truth, which I like a lot better than Pilfer, because this is also good against the Esper mid-range decks as it gets rid of their Virtue and their Wedding Announcement. So very powerful if those cards are already on the board, and it does get rid of Leyline Binding from Domain as well once it's on the board. So then it could potentially flip over into Geological Appraiser or flip over into a Gix after, and then swing for combat when they're thinking that they're not going to have to worry about that anymore. Brotherhood's End, I might be looking for, I do have 2 in the sideboard. I might be looking for Brotherhood's End and a Braid, because I do know that the Schooner from Dimir and Esper is very powerful, but also Urbrask Forge from Mono Red is something I need to deal with, and just ways to remove problematic artifact creatures that can grow, like Incubate tokens, where Go for the Throat can't kill those. Some of these other spells can. We do have an extra Shield of the Apocalypse, some Gix's commands to deal with more creatures on the board, and a singleton copy of Cruelty of Gix for potentially Domain, or some of these Rakdos Mirror matchups where if they're playing the Carnosaur version, I could steal their Carnosaur and suddenly I'm playing both decks at the same time. So this is going to be a little bit more low to the ground aggro version of the Rakdos deck I'm running. I'm going to be posting some more gameplay as I start preparing for my RCQ, but this is kind of the deck tech overall to showcase why I went with this one over the Discover version I was playing previously. So if you want to see some gameplay, you want to look at other standard deck techs while you're prepping for your own RCQ, make sure to tap that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time.